The Chunin exams. For many, the birth of a fascination and love for all things tournament arcs. For others, an update to the formula that brought variety into a shonen tradition. No matter who you are, if you've seen Naruto, you'll likely have a nostalgic fondness for this arc. Before the kaiju sorcerer battles of later war arcs, or the alien demigods of Boruto. The Chunin exams, for many, myself included, represent the peak of what Naruto could have been. But in an arc that stretches for as long as this one did, there are bound to be moments that don't quite impress compared to their series high counterparts. I've already made a video breaking down the Forest of Death, and with the written exam being a minor part of the overall story, as well as my partner Zero covering the epilogue villain in Gaara, perhaps all that's left to discuss for the Chunin exams is, in fact, the thing all fans looked forward to the most, the 1v1s, a staple in any good tournament arc where the newly introduced catalog of characters duke it out in highly structured combat. Starting from the preliminaries, the Chunin exams have a total of 13 sanctioned 1v1s. My name is Hoodie Song, this is Kato, and today, let's rank each and every one of them. Today's video is brought to you by a new pearl in the ocean of mobile games called Hero Wars. It's an online role-playing action game with a variety of PvP and PvE modes. In Hero Wars, I could fight against powerful bosses and experience a dramatic story all at the same time. It's a classic fantasy game with missions, loot, and upgradable champions. The game has more than 50 unique heroes, each one with unique abilities. Combine and assemble different teams to battle in the arena or traverse the endless tower. But the main party happens online, where you can create guilds, fight with other players, and constantly rise in rank. Join the game now and get a super chest with a secret hero, as well as 62 emeralds and 30,000 gold. Hero Wars is available on mobile devices and also runs in a web browser. Scan this QR code or download the game from the link in the description. I'll see you in Hero Wars. Number 13. Choji vs Dosu. When I go through the rest of this list, you're going to see me regularly give credit to fights that are able to keep the runtime concise and to the point. If you can get all the important beats of a fight done in just a couple minutes, more power to you, and I feel that should be rewarded in my rankings. This is the outlier. Choji vs Dosu is the final fight of the preliminary exams, coming just after the climactic fan favorite of Gaara vs Rock Lee. To give an example of just how insignificant this fight is, I had written this entire video before even realizing that I forgot to rewatch this one. It is completely unremarkable, and in that regard, I almost feel its conciseness works against it. I guess I just don't really see a reason why the preliminary exams couldn't have ended on the high of Gaara and Rock Lee. While I understand the general principle of moments of low tension immediately following moments of high intensity, this phase of the exams already transitions into a training arc, so from a narrative standpoint, I don't think we're really in desperate need of any brief cooldown Choji vs Dosu might give us. I do think giving Dosu an example to demonstrate his power is valuable considering his later role as fodder for Gaara. Letting Gaara decimate someone who the audience recognizes as powerful is useful considering his role as the intimidating antagonistic force. But we quite literally just had that accomplished in the Gaara vs Lee fight, and honestly Dosu's demonstration of power is a bit lacking here considering just how weak Kishimoto made Choji out to be. All in all, this fight kinda blows, and I'm not sure it's even worth the 300 plus words it took to explain why. Therefore, it makes the bottom of my list, sitting comfortably with a final grade of D-. Number 12. Tenten vs Temari. The next two fights on my list are a bit of a toss-up. Either one could have gone on the second to last spot, and if you asked me any other day, I might just switch them on a whim. But I figure I might catch heat for the next fight, so let's cushion it with one I think we can all agree on. Tenten vs Temari is a super memeable fight because the feats displayed are just not good. This sequence of Tenten slowly running in a circle around Temari is just pitiful in comparison to the absolute Sonic level blitzes we see come from Lee and Sasuke at later points. It's weird that Tenten would be considered a ranged fighter here, considering most weapons, even the ones she uses to throw, would be more than welcome in hand-to-hand combat. Anime fans love swords. If you look at popularity polls for any given anime, if there's a character with a sword, it's highly likely they'll be somewhere in the top 5. So the question is, why not make this so-called weapons expert a sword wielder? It'd give you more room for flashy combat, more use in a world where kunai and shuriken really don't do much, and ultimately a more memorable combatant. Lacking all of these things, Tenten really doesn't demonstrate much to make her mark on the viewer's mind, and Temari's fans are probably at their most bland in this showcasing. But that said, this fight takes our second lowest spot with a final grade of a flat D. Number 11. Naruto vs Kiba. Now, I truly don't know if this will be controversial. I don't like this fight. In fact, this might be one of the only fights in this entire arc that I actively dislike as opposed to just finding a little mediocre. It starts off a little awkwardly with an obnoxious amount of side character interjections, all stating their shock and awe that Naruto has managed to grow up and become as powerful as he has. But there's a notable amount of dissonance in the fact that all of their comments are purely spurred on from Naruto managing to merely stand up after being tackled by Kiba. There are a lot of cool things that Naruto has done at this point. He's defeated incredibly powerful ninja, and while the bystanders here have no way of knowing about his encounter with Haku, we as the audience do. And considering the level of Naruto's feats thus far, resisting an attack from Kiba is almost certainly at the low end. It's just a weird sense of Kishimoto telling us that something cool has happened when we just objectively know nothing has. Of course, that's not really the reason this fight is rated so low. Other than being significantly too long, the real detractor for this fight comes in one simple moment where Naruto overpowers Kiba at his own game. Of course, if you've watched this fight recently, then you know that I'm referring to the infamous fart attack. God, I don't know if my sense of humor is just too different from the average viewer, but this was just not my thing. Anyways, for that reason, Naruto vs. Kiba earns its spot with a low grade of a flat D. Number 10. Sasuke vs. Yoroi. Leaving the realm of one main character to the next, I don't think this placement will be too controversial, but I do find it surprising considering just how important Sasuke is. Not to mention how often his fights are some of the highlights of this entire series. That said, the overall negative outlook I have on this fight is largely due to his opponent Yoroi. This character is boring. In fact, probably the most boring of the entire preliminary exams. From an uninspired design that he basically shares with his other boring teammate, to an ability that presents no visual flair or interesting narrative mechanic, this is just a boring fight. I find myself wondering if something like Knuckles' APR in Hunter x Hunter could have saved us here. In understanding the plot relevance of Yoroi's ability, I think the ticking clock of an ability like APR creates a much more dramatic and high-stakes scenario than the still position we find ourselves in with Yoroi holding Sasuke's head and mindlessly sucking his chakra for a painstaking amount of time. I give this fight a D+, and a thorough skip on any future rewatch. Number 9. Sakura vs. Ino. As we leave the realm of Ds, some may be shocked to find my first okay fight is one that is pretty ubiquitously hated. While I understand the general view on Sakura being pretty abysmal, ultimately the fact that Sakura and Ino are weak doesn't really matter to me in the context of this fight. Two weak characters are in fact the perfect conduit with which to give us some of that grounded hand-to-hand combat we all know and love. At its best, Sakura vs. Ino delivers on some high-quality taijutsu choreography, and I think Sakura's use of clones is pretty clever, not to mention the hair trap that Ino conducts. But while this fight has its highs, it's impossible to ignore the fact that more so than any other here, Sakura vs. Ino is plagued with flashback after flashback. And unlike some of the better fights with more interesting characters, the history of these two simply isn't narratively interesting enough to warrant it. Not to mention, Inner Sakura isn't funny, and the fact that it's how she resists Ino's mind transfer and wins this fight is just so lame. For that, Sakura vs. Ino loses enough points to get knocked into a C- and just barely hang above the lowest tier. Number 8. Shino vs. Zaku. This is an interesting fight because it concerns a character that I find a bit complexing. Like Sasuke and Gaara, Shino pretty comfortably fits the mold of a mysterious yet powerful cool guy character. He's a man of few words and yet boasts a significant display of jutsu that makes him a top tier threat among the Leaf Genin. Likewise, he's intelligent and fits a solid niche. Why is this character not popular? Is it really just because bugs are kinda icky? If so, that's understandable, but I'm curious if there's more to it. Regardless, this fight is pretty short and shares half of its runtime with the parallel events of Orochimaru confronting Kakashi. I do feel like the fact that these events are happening simultaneously does contribute to the tone of the fight at hand, and in a way even improves our perspective on Zaku as just another pawn of a conniving, devious Orochimaru. It doesn't do much to impress, but it's far from bad, and probably the first fight on this list that I would say deserves a favorable review. I give Shino vs. Zaku the final grade of a flat C. On to the next. Number 7. Kankuro vs. Masumi. This is part 2 to the boring squad with Yoroi's boring teammate, Masumi. The weirdest part about this fight is instead of giving Masumi a stretching Elastigirl type power, Kishimoto instead decides to give him the most unnerving ability to dislocate his bones and control his flaccid body with chakra. It's a gross description for an utterly garbage technique, both realistically and narratively. This fight gets points for introducing puppets, which I love and think Naruto ought to have explored more of, but other than that, it gets a C+. Naruto vs Neji. As we move past the C tier, I think we could jump firmly into the realm of only fights I would consider at least moderately good. They may not all be amazing, I probably wouldn't choose to rewatch every single one, but they have more than enough positives to outweigh any occasional flaw. Naruto vs Neji is probably the fight I've rewatched the least in this final stage of the Chunin exams, partially because I think this is Naruto at his least interesting power set. Before this fight, most times Naruto gets in danger, he dips into the overwhelming power of the Nine-Tailed Fox. Think of the Zabuza arc when he goes up against Haku. And after this fight, he either relies on his summoning jutsu or Rasengan. This and the Kiba fight exist in a weird middle ground where he kinda just does taijutsu with shadow clones, and I find it a tad bit underwhelming. Yes, he does use the Nine-Tailed Chakra, but not in a way that visually changes anything or makes it more interesting. In essence, he just gains a temporary speed boost for one brief exchange. But the tactics are clean, authentically stemming from strategies he already developed in his fight with Kiba, and I think Neji's backstory provides the narrative drama and emotional stakes that I yearn for in a great fight from the series. Maybe it's a little long, but not absurdly so, and for that I give Naruto vs Neji a final grade of a flat B. Number 5. Shikamaru vs Kin. These next two fights are in a very similar ranking to me, so I'm going to give preference to the one with a bit more narrative weight and focus for now on Shikamaru's debut battle, which is a little less important and more of just a well-utilized break period. Like I discussed in the Choji vs Dosu fight, I do think there is immense value in a low-stakes fight like this that balances out the pacing and gives viewers a chance to relax and enjoy themselves outside of the high-intensity fights that might be coming up. Shikamaru vs Kin gets points for being incredibly concise, with just a brief exchange of blows before Shikamaru ultimately displays a clever strategy for nailing his unique jutsu and comedically securing the win. I also give credit here to Kin, who absolutely does not need to be interesting, but does so through a unique combination of bells and senbon, which are both underutilized in the larger series. For me, this fight gets a B+ and remains the comfortable, fun introduction to our fan favorite genius. Number 4. Sasuke vs Gaara. Going into this fight, I anticipated it placing a lot higher than it did. It has one of my favorite designs for Sasuke, one of the best villains in Gaara, and the reveal of the iconic Chidori for the first time out of the hands of Kakashi. I love the way it emphasizes Sasuke's genius, with his sudden ability to match the outrageous speed of Rock Lee. One, I think fast characters just are cool, and having Sasuke be fast makes him cooler. But also two, I really like this idea that it was seeing someone better than him that unlocked this hidden potential to exceed his past limitations. It's a fascinating yet completely true aspect of life. One need look no further than the famous concept of the 4-minute barrier. The 4-minute barrier refers to this idea that a 4-minute mile was once considered impossible. For most of human history, there was not one single verifiable record of someone running an entire mile in less than 4 minutes. That was until 1954, when Roger Bannister did so in 3 minutes and 59 seconds. Since then, in just 60 years, 4 minutes has become a standard, with the mile record having been lowered by nearly 17 seconds. It's a real fact of life that greatness can inspire greatness, and that idea is being represented here through the dynamic of Sasuke and Lee, which I give this fight major credit for. The only real downside to this fight, and it is a major one, is that it just doesn't have a conclusion. It's hard to blame it, considering its place within the actual narrative, but taking the fight for what it is, that at least needs to be factored in. For that, I give this fight a B+, maintaining its solid placing within the upper tier of this list. Number 3. Shikamaru vs Temari. Rounding out our top 3, it's important to remark that I think all of these last fights are brilliant. While I'm happy to skip the likes of Tenten vs Temari or Sakura vs Ino, all 3 of these last fights are insanely rewatchable with completely different reasons for each. Shikamaru vs Temari earns its place for being really fucking fun. This comes as no surprise considering how I described Shikamaru's last fight in the same way. This is a character who is defined by his ability to come up with genius strategies, but also juxtaposed against his equally defining trait of laziness. How this manifests is with fight scenes of Shikamaru almost effortlessly outsmarting his opponents, all filled with hilarious quips about wishing he were doing anything else. It's no surprise that Shikamaru became a fan favorite because he's really just enjoyable to watch. This fight lacks nothing in spectacle, tactics, or characterization, and what it's missing in emotional stakes is more than made up for in raw coolness. Now, because I have a general preference towards more dramatic, narratively heavy moments, I had to give it the bottom of my highest tier, but even so, it rests easy with the final grade of an A-. Number 2. Neji vs Hinata. I don't know if giving this fight such a high placement is the most common among fans. but to me it feels well deserved. Where other fights, even great ones like the previous entry, feel a bit lacking in emotional stakes, Neji vs Hinata is anything but that. Of all the preliminary matches, this is the one that had the most character baggage, even if we weren't privy to it at the moment. This is a heartbreaking match, primarily because Hinata, probably more so than anyone else in this series, is a character that can be classified as a being of pure wholesomeness. The reason fans love Hinata is because throughout the entire series, she has always been kind and caring to our main character, even when everyone else in the world hated him. But as any JoJo fan would know, it is the cute puppies who are most susceptible to utter decimation. No event in Naruto could warrant such fury and anger as the brutal defeat of Hinata. It's not the only time this sequence occurs as a narrative tool, and each time it summons a reckoning from Naruto as rage-induced as any other. But this is not just a simple fridging attempt by Kishimoto where the love interest is abused and tortured for the progression of the main character. That is a notable byproduct, but of importance is that anytime this happens, it serves Hinata as well. What makes this fight so tragic is that so many of Neji's attacks come immediately following Hinata's declaration of growth. Engaging in this fight is a testament to Hinata's character development as more than just the shy girl crushing on our main character. Referring back to the idea of inspiration with Lee and Sasuke, in this fight, Hinata breaks free from the mold of just pining for Naruto's love, and instead fights as someone being inspired by him. And regardless of the outcome, you can't help but leave this match thinking that Hinata was a fucking badass for standing her ground against one of the strongest competitors in this tournament. I absolutely love this fight, and if it weren't for the undisputed GOAT taking the #1 spot, I would be delighted to hand it to Neji vs Hinata. For its beautiful hand-to-hand combat and ability to pull on my heartstrings, this match gets an easy A in second place on my list. Number 1. Gaara vs Rock Lee. It really couldn't have been anything else. I am not the type to alter my entire list just to placate fan expectations. In fact, I anticipate some of this list being somewhat controversial. But there's a real reason why this fight is not just considered the best of the arc, but by many considered the best of the entire show. The first thing you'll notice about this fight is that immediately the entire episodes surrounding it start to look way more polished. When I was rewatching the arc in full, I couldn't help but notice how rough around the edges early Naruto could be. While there are plenty of brilliant moments and outstanding animation, it was hard to ignore how often characters would just be wonky or off-model. It felt like at any given moment, they could cut to a side character monologue only to reveal a wobbly lined face with eyes facing two different directions. It's not unwatchable, but it is hilariously noticeable. That's not the case with this fight. Gaara vs Rock Lee holds up to the best fights currently being animated and exceeds plenty of the rest. At the top of this final three, I said each of them earned their spot for a different reason. Shikamaru vs Temari was cool. Neji vs Hinata was tragic. In a way, Gaara vs Rock Lee is just both of those combined, but I think it does so with a twist of flavoring. Rock Lee isn't cool like Shikamaru. He's not coming up with brilliant tactics. In fact, one might theorize Rock Lee kinda threw this fight because of how simplistically he approached it. But he's cool in his utter determination to prove himself, and ultimately for his complete badass display of speed and strength. Rock Lee set the bar for a speed-type character, and while others in the show managed to reach his heights, they'll always be compared to what he did right here. Likewise, he isn't tragic in the way Neji vs Hinata is. These characters have never met. There is no backstory between them like the Hyugas. But where something like Ino vs Sakura loses points for its inability to properly weave in flashbacks, Rock Lee vs Gaara excels because of its flashbacks. Each one draws us further and further into empathizing for Lee until finally, by the end of it, this bowl-cut weirdo has us in absolute tears, begging for his victory, even though we all know it's impossible. It takes a while before those flashbacks kick in, but there's never a moment where this fight isn't absolutely goated. It's epic, it's sad, it's triumphant, it's devastating, it is everything you could possibly want in a Naruto fight down to the introduction of an ability that would become legendary among the series fans. There is no world where I don't give Gaara vs Lee an A+, and for that reason, it is without a doubt the #1 spot on my list. But that said, this is just my list. Maybe you have a compelling reason for a different #1. I'd be more than interested to read some of your thoughts in the comment section below. Let us know what you think about some of my more controversial placings and what some of your hot takes for this list would be. Before I go, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of the incredible patrons over at patreon.com/KatoYT. We're super active in our patron Discord, and actually a majority of the research done for this video was in a Chunin exams rewatch with those in the server. So if that's something you're interested in, pledge just a single $1 to get an invite. I also write and produce a webcomic called Romeo, Juliet, and Juliet that you can read over on Webtoon Canvas. You can follow the channel's Twitter at KatoBeyond or my personal one at hoodie_writes. Links to everything will be in the description. Again, my name is Hoodie Song, this is Kato, and thank you for watching.